They say death comes in many forms, but the Devil's Wolves motorcycle gang never expected it to wear military boots. When the smoke cleared that summer night, 13 bikes lay shattered across Mason Valley's main street, their riders in chains, and their leader, known only as the Ghost, learned what happens when you mistake a Force Recon Marine for easy prey. But to understand how one veteran turned a quiet Montana town into a battlefield, we need to start at the beginning. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Sergeant James "Iron" Reeves stood motionless in the golden Montana sunset, staring at his sister's ranch house while his combat-hardened instincts screamed danger. Something was wrong. The usually bustling Mason Valley felt different, tense, like a coiled rattlesnake ready to strike. The streets were too quiet for a Thursday evening in summer. No kids rode their bikes, no neighbors walked their dogs, and the usual buzz of community life had been replaced by an eerie silence. The familiar crunch of gravel under his boots brought back memories as he approached the house. Sarah had insisted he come stay after his final tour. "You need peace and quiet to adjust to civilian life," she'd said. But the peaceful town he remembered had vanished. Even the air felt heavy with unspoken threats. Inside, the house smelled of fresh coffee and Sarah's famous apple pie, but his sister's smile didn't reach her eyes. Her hands trembled slightly as she poured his coffee, a detail that set off every alarm in his veteran's mind. 15 years in Force Recon had taught him to notice the smallest signs of distress. "You should have told me things were bad here," he said quietly, watching her fidget with her apron. Sarah's eyes darted to the window as the rumble of motorcycles echoed in the distance. "They came 6 months ago," she whispered, sinking into a kitchen chair. "The Devil's Wolves. At first it was just noise, bikes racing through town at all hours. Then the protection fees started. Businesses, farms, everyone has to pay. Those who refuse." She pulled up her sleeve, revealing dark bruises. "Last month, they burned down the Miller's feed store. Old Joe Miller had run that store for 40 years. James's jaw tightened as familiar cold anger settled in his chest. "The police?" Sarah's bitter laugh held no humor. "Sheriff Davis resigned 3 months ago. His replacement? The Ghost's cousin. The few deputies who tried to help either quit or had accidents. Even the state police won't come near Mason Valley anymore." The roar of motorcycles grew louder. James moved to the window, counting the riders as they passed. 8 bikes, their riders wearing leather vests emblazoned with a demonic wolf's head. The lead rider, massive, with a skull bandana covering his face, turned his head toward the house. Even through the tinted visor of his helmet, James could feel the man's arrogant smirk. A soft knock at the back door made Sarah jump. Emma Chen, who'd taught James in high school, stood on the porch, nervously glancing over her shoulder. Her once black hair had gone completely gray, but it wasn't age that had put the fear in her eyes. "James, thank God you're here," she whispered, hurrying inside. "Your sister. She tried to organize resistance, town meetings, petitions to the state government. Then they visited her restaurant one night, destroyed everything. The insurance company denied the claim, of course. They own the adjusters, too." James listened as Emma detailed the Devil's Wolves operation. Their leader, known only as the Ghost, had transformed the peaceful valley into his personal kingdom. Small businesses paid protection money, farmers surrendered portions of their crops, and the local police turned a blind eye. Those who resisted faced escalating violence. "Last week," Emma's voice cracked, "they beat Tommy Chen, my grandson. He's only 16. Said it was a message to anyone thinking of calling the FBI again." James's hand clenched into a fist. He'd spent 15 years fighting warlords and terrorists overseas, while his home had fallen to a different kind of evil. The familiar weight of responsibility settled on his shoulders, the same weight he'd carried leading Marines into combat. "Tell me everything," he said quietly, his voice carrying the calm authority that had steadied his men through countless battles. "Their patterns, their hangouts, everything you know." As Emma detailed the gang's activities, James's military training kicked in. He mentally mapped patrol routes, noted vulnerable points, identified potential assets and threats. This wasn't so different from analyzing insurgent activities in hostile territory. The ghost, Emma continued. Nobody knows his real name. Showed up out of nowhere 2 years ago, started recruiting local troublemakers. Now he has over 30 riders, plus whoever he's bought off in the county government. A commotion outside drew their attention. Through the window, they watched 3 bikers surrounding old Mr. Chen outside his grocery store. The threatening postures were clear, even from a distance. "Double the payment this week," one biker demanded, his voice carrying across the quiet street. "Ghost says you've been talking too much to strangers." James was moving before conscious thought, combat instincts taking over. Sarah grabbed his arm. "James, no! They'll kill you." He gently removed her hand. "Sarah, they don't know what killing is. But they're about to learn the difference between terrorizing innocent people and facing someone who fights back." As James Reeves stepped onto his sister's front porch, 15 years of combat training guided his movements. He moved with the fluid grace of a predator, each step calculated and purposeful. The evening sun cast long shadows across Mason Valley's main street, and the American flag hanging from Sarah's porch caught the fading light. In that moment, James made a silent promise. This was his home, and he was about to teach the devil's wolves the cost of bringing violence to his doorstep. The fluorescent lights from Chen's grocery cast harsh shadows across the parking lot as James approached. The largest biker still had his meaty hand wrapped around Mr. Chen's collar, but his attention shifted to James's measured footsteps on the asphalt. "Evening, gentlemen," James said softly, his voice carrying the deadly calm that had preceded many battles. I believe Mr. Chen explained his situation clearly. The 3 bikers exchanged glances before the largest one, wearing a vest that identified him as Razor, released Mr. Chen with a shove. "Well, look what we got here, the new guy. Mind your own business, soldier boy. You made it my business when you put hands on a man who fed half this town's kids for 30 years. James positioned himself between Mr. Chen and the bikers. "I understand you're collecting payments. Let's discuss a more reasonable arrangement." Razor laughed, but uncertainty flickered in his eyes as he studied James's stance. 15 years of combat had left their mark, not in obvious scars or medals, but in the way James carried himself, the calm confidence that came from facing real danger. "Listen up, tough guy," Razor sneered. "You don't make arrangements. The ghost makes arrangements, and right now he's arranged for old man Chen here to pay double." Behind James, Mr. Chen whispered, "Please, Sergeant Reeves, don't cause trouble. They will burn my store like they did Emma's restaurant." "No, they won't," James replied without taking his eyes off Razor. "Because these gentlemen are about to learn something important about Mason Valley. It's protected now." The shortest biker, a wiry man with a snake tattooed on his neck, pulled out a switchblade. The click of the blade opening echoed in the quiet lot. "Protected by who?" "You. By all of us." James smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You see, I've spent the last 15 years learning about protection. Real protection, not extortion dressed up as security. And I've gotten very, very good at dealing with people who confuse the two." Razor took a step forward, cracking his knuckles. "Last chance to walk away, Marine. Would hate to explain to the ghost why we had to mess up that pretty uniform of yours." "Not wearing a uniform anymore," James said quietly. "Which means I'm not bound by rules of engagement. Think carefully about your next move." The third biker, silent until now, grabbed Razor's arm. "Hold up this guy, I heard about him. Force Recon, 3 Purple Hearts. My cousin served with him in Fallujah." Razor shrugged off the warning. "I don't care if he's General Patton, nobody disrespects the devil's wolves." He swung a meaty fist at James's face. What happened next became town legend. James moved with liquid grace, deflecting the punch and using Razor's momentum to send him sprawling. The snake-tattooed biker lunged with his knife, but James caught his wrist, twisted, and the blade clattered to the ground along with its owner. The third biker backed away, hands raised. "Hey man, we're just doing our job." "Your job?" James's voice carried across the lot. "Your job is terrorizing shopkeepers, burning businesses, beating up people who can't fight back?" He turned to Razor, who was struggling to his feet. "Tell your ghost I want to meet him tomorrow night. St. Mary's parking lot." Razor spat blood onto the pavement. "You're dead, Marine. You hear me? Dead." "I've heard that before," James replied calmly. "From better men than you. Tomorrow night. Don't keep me waiting." As the bikers retreated to their motorcycles, a small crowd gathered at the edges of the parking lot. James could see fear in their eyes, but something else too, a spark of hope. Mr. Chen clutched James's arm. "Sergeant Reeves, you don't understand. The ghost, he has connections. Police, county officials, even judges. They will hurt you." James placed a steady hand on the old man's shoulder. "Mr. Chen, when I was 14, my sister and I were starving after our parents died. You caught me stealing food, but instead of calling the police, you gave me a job and a hot meal every day. You trusted me when nobody else would. Now it's my turn to return that trust." The crowd grew larger. James recognized faces from his youth. Coach Peterson, who'd pushed him to join the Marines, the Sullivan twins who'd enlisted with him, now local mechanics, Mrs. Thompson, who'd taught him history. All watching, all wondering if change was finally possible. "Listen to me." James raised his voice to address the gathering. "I know you're scared. The devil's wolves have ruled through fear for too long, but fear only works when we're alone. Together, we're stronger than any gang." A police car cruised past slowly, its occupants watching, but not stopping. James noted the vehicle number. Tomorrow would be about more than just confronting the ghost. It would be about exposing everyone who enabled the devil's wolves' reign of terror. Back at Sarah's house, Emma Chen waited anxiously on the porch. "I saw what happened. Your parents would be proud, but James, the ghost, he doesn't fight fair." "Neither do I, Mrs. Chen. Not anymore." Inside, James opened his duffel bag. Under his clothes lay a small case containing everything he needed. Not weapons, but something far more dangerous to men like the ghost. Evidence. The war for Mason Valley's soul was about to begin, and James Reeves intended to show the devil's wolves the difference between terrorizing civilians and facing a Marine who'd never forgotten his oath to protect the innocent. Over the next several hours, James Reeves made calls to old contacts. A state police captain who'd served with him in Iraq, an FBI agent he'd worked with on counterterrorism, a district attorney who'd never forgotten how James had saved his brother in Fallujah. By midnight, Sarah's dining room table was covered in papers, photos, and maps. The devil's wolves had been careful, but they'd never faced someone trained in military intelligence. Every protection payment, every act of vandalism, every corrupted cop, it all formed a pattern, and patterns could be broken. A text message lit up his phone. "You're digging your own grave, Marine. The ghost sends his regards." James smiled. They still didn't understand. They thought this was about territory, about power, about fear. But they were wrong. This was about justice. And tomorrow night the devil's wolves would learn what happened when they brought their street tactics against a man who'd spent his life training for real war. Outside, motorcycles roared past his sister's house, then another and another. They were watching, trying to intimidate him. But James Reeves had stared down warlords and terrorists across 3 continents. The devil's wolves were about to discover they'd made a fatal mistake. They'd threatened the wrong veteran's hometown. Dawn broke over Mason Valley with an uneasy silence. James had spent the night reviewing satellite images of the area. Another skill from his military days that was about to prove useful. The devil's wolves' patrol patterns were sloppy, predictable. They never expected anyone to study them this closely. A soft knock at the door revealed Deputy Sarah Chen, Emma Chen's niece, looking nervous in her crisp uniform. "Sergeant Reeves, I worked with your sister in the neighborhood watch before the devil's wolves shut it down." James gestured for her to enter. The young deputy glanced over her shoulder. "There's not much we can do officially. They have pictures, videos of officers taking bribes, evidence disappears, witnesses change their stories." "Which officers?" James's voice was quiet but intense. "Captain Reynolds, Lieutenant Harris, maybe others." Chen pulled out a small notebook. I've been keeping records, but my sergeant says to drop it. Why are you telling me this? Your sister, when they started threatening businesses, she was the only one who stood up, said someone had to fight back. Chen's eyes filled with tears. 2 days later, they vandalized her restaurant. The stress, her heart. James's jaw tightened. The restaurant attack? It wasn't in the police report? There was no report. Reynolds lost the paperwork. Chen straightened her shoulders. I became a cop to protect people, not to watch thugs terrorize innocent citizens. Tonight, James said, things change, but I need you to do something for me. By mid-morning, the town was buzzing with whispered conversations. The confrontation at Chen's store had sparked something. Not quite hope, but a restless energy. The Devil's Wolves responded by flooding the streets with members, their presence more aggressive than usual. James watched from Sarah's porch as 3 bikers harassed Mrs. Thompson, demanding immediate payment for extra protection. The old teacher's hands shook as she counted out bills from her pension check. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Last chance, Marine. Leave town, or we burn everything you care about, starting with your sister's house. James's response was simple. Come try. Inside, he continued gathering intelligence. Chen's notebook provided names, dates, locations. The Devil's Wolves had started small. Noise complaints, vandalism. Then protection payments from businesses. Soon they controlled building permits, health inspections, even school contracts. The Ghost's network of corruption reached deep into county government. A knock at his back door revealed Tommy Chen, Emma's grandson, his face still bearing bruises from his message. Mom sent me, the boy whispered, holding out a USB drive. Security camera footage. Dad's been saving it. Every payment, every threat, he was too scared to show the police. Your father's a brave man. They broke his arm last month, said it was a warning. James's eyes hardened. They won't hurt anyone else. By afternoon, more people came forward. Emma Chen brought her late husband's old ham radio set, perfect for secure communications. Coach Peterson offered his hunting cabin as a safe house. Even Mr. Sullivan, whose auto shop had been burned down, provided documentation of suspicious insurance claim denials. Sarah's dining room became an operations center. Maps marked with patrol routes, lists of corrupted officials, financial records showing money movements. The Devil's Wolves had created their own little kingdom, but they'd never faced an enemy who understood asymmetrical warfare. A commotion outside drew his attention. 2 bikers were spray-painting threats on Sarah's garage door. Dead Marine walking. James watched calmly through his security cameras, newly installed last night, recording everything. The bikers took special pleasure in destroying Sarah's prized rose garden. Deputy Chen called with an update. They're nervous. The Ghost called an emergency meeting. Every member has been ordered to St. Mary's tonight. Perfect. Everything ready on your end? State Police Tactical Unit is on standby. FBI too. But Chen hesitated. These guys, they're not just thugs. The Ghost, he enjoys hurting people. I know. James checked his watch. Time to prepare for tonight. He spent the next hour calling his volunteers, veterans from 4 wars who lived in the valley, men and women who understood duty, who remembered what it meant to protect their home. Coach Peterson, a Vietnam vet, positioned himself in St. Mary's bell tower. Perfect overview of the parking lot. The Sullivan twins, both ex-Marines, took up positions covering the back exits. Every approach, every escape route would be watched. As sunset approached, James made one final call to his FBI contact. You have everything? Enough to take down their whole operation. Just get us proof of the Ghost's direct involvement. James hung up and walked to the window. In the distance, motorcycles roared. Dozens of them. The Devil's Wolves were gathering for what they thought would be their victory. They didn't understand that James had spent 15 years learning the art of war. Tonight wouldn't be a street fight. It would be an operation, and the Devil's Wolves were about to learn the difference between being predators and being prey. As darkness fell over Mason Valley, James stepped onto his porch, a small recording device hidden in his jacket pocket. St. Mary's Church loomed against the darkening sky, its windows glowing with harsh fluorescent light. Once a place of worship and community gatherings, tonight it would become a battlefield. Motorcycles lined the parking lot. James counted 37 bikes plus 6 pickup trucks belonging to their associates in local government. His earpiece crackled with familiar voices. "Bell tower in position," Coach Peterson whispered. "Got eyes on 4 armed guards rooftop. Sullivan twins checking in, back entrances covered. Deputy Chen here, state police units in position, 5 minutes out. FBI tactical team standing by." James walked alone down the center of the street, no weapons visible. They'd be expecting that. Instead, he carried something far more dangerous, evidence that would destroy their entire operation. 2 massive bikers blocked the church entrance, arms crossed. "Need to check you for weapons, tough guy." "Check all you want," James said calmly. "I'm not here to fight. I'm here to negotiate." They patted him down roughly, then escorted him inside. The church's main hall had been transformed. Where the altar once stood, a makeshift throne had been erected. The ghost lounged there, his face hidden behind a chrome skull mask, every inch the Demon King in his custom leather jacket studded with military medals. Medals James knew he'd never earned. "Welcome, Sergeant Reeves," the ghost's voice carried across the room, electronically distorted. "I've heard so much about you. The hero returns home." James studied his opponent. 6'4", military bearing despite the theatrical costume. The way he held himself suggested formal combat training. "You've caused quite a stir," the ghost continued, "interfering with legitimate business transactions, threatening my men. Very disappointing." "Legitimate?" James's voice remained calm. "Like burning down Sarah's restaurant, breaking Mr. Chen's arm, beating up teenagers?" The ghost chuckled. "Tragic accidents. No police reports filed, as I recall. Just like there won't be a report when they find what's left of you tomorrow." Laughter rippled through the gathered bikers. James noted positions, weapons, exits, old habits that never died. "Before we discuss my future," James set a USB drive on a table, "let's talk about yours. I have some interesting documents. Financial records, witness statements, footage of your tax assessor friend accepting bribes." The ghost's posture shifted slightly. "Documents can be lost. Witnesses change their minds. You're not the first to try this." "True. But I'm the first who sent copies to every law enforcement agency in 3 states, plus major media outlets. Time-release emails set to send everything at midnight unless I stop them." The skull mask tilted. "You're bluffing." James pulled out his phone, displaying spreadsheets. "Your protection racket brings in roughly $200,000 a month, split between 40 core members, minus 50% kicked up to your friends in county government. That's why you needed to double Mrs. Thompson's payments, to cover Captain Reynolds's gambling debts." Murmurs spread through the gathered bikers. James caught uncertainty in some faces, fear in others. They'd never faced an opponent who'd done his homework. "Interesting timing," he continued. "Razor here tried to shake down Mr. Chen exactly when your friend in the health department scheduled a surprise inspection, almost like it was coordinated." "Enough!" The ghost stood, his voice losing its mechanical calm. "Kill him!" Razor charged, but James was ready. 15 years of close combat training took over. He sidestepped the wild punch, using Razor's momentum to send him crashing into a pew. "Now!" James shouted into his concealed mic. Windows shattered as flashbang grenades exploded. State police tactical teams rappelled from the roof. FBI agents burst through side doors. The Sullivan twins crashed through the back entrance. Chaos erupted. Some bikers tried to fight, others ran. The ghost scrambled for a hidden exit but found Coach Peterson blocking his path, hunting rifle raised. "Going somewhere, son?" In less than 3 minutes, it was over. James stood in the center of the church, surrounded by groaning bikers and the sounds of handcuffs clicking shut. The ghost, his mask torn away revealing a dishonorably discharged army sergeant, glared at James. "You think this changes anything?" "I have friends, powerful friends." "Had friends," James corrected him. "But they're all going down with you. Right now, FBI agents are raiding the homes of every official in your pocket. That includes Judge Harrison, who signed so many favorable rulings for you. Deputy Chen approached, holding papers. Sergeant Reeves, arrest warrants just came through for Reynolds and Harris. We're picking them up now. James nodded, then turned back to the ghost. See, you made a classic mistake. You thought fear and violence were the ultimate weapons. But information, that's what really wins wars. As the Devil's Wolves were led away in handcuffs, James retrieved his recording device. Inside, every word, every threat, every admission of corruption had been captured. Through his earpiece, he heard Coach Peterson whisper, "Your sister would be proud, son." Outside, townspeople had gathered, watching as their tormentors were loaded into police vans. The long nightmare was ending, but James knew his work wasn't finished. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Corrupted systems needed cleaning. Damaged lives needed rebuilding. A community needed to heal. But tonight, as he watched the ghost being led away, James allowed himself a small smile. He'd fought wars in distant lands, but this victory, here in his hometown, felt more significant than any medal he'd earned. The Devil's Wolves had ruled through fear. They never understood that real strength comes from protecting others. Now they had all the time in the world to learn that lesson from inside a prison cell. Dawn broke over Mason Valley differently the next morning. Children waited at bus stops without fear. Mrs. Thompson opened her bakery on time, and Mr. Chen's grocery store sign glowed proudly in the early light. But James Reeves knew better than to celebrate too early. 15 years of military service had taught him that the aftermath of victory often proved more challenging than the battle itself. His phone hadn't stopped buzzing since midnight. FBI agents needed statements. State police requested documentation. Local news wanted interviews. But the most urgent call came from Tommy Chen. "Sergeant Reeves." The boy's voice trembled. "They're back. Not the Devil's Wolves, but their allies, the Blood Riders from the next county. They're at Dad's store." James was moving before Tommy finished speaking. He'd anticipated this. Power vacuums always attracted opportunists. Through his earpiece, he alerted his volunteer network. "Coach, you copy?" "Read you clear, son. Already got eyes on them. 6 bikes, 3 cars. They're trying to take over the Wolves' territory." James reached the store in time to see 7 men in Blood Riders colors surrounding Mr. Chen. Their leader, a heavily scarred man called Blade, was making their position clear. "Devil's Wolves are gone," Blade grinned. "But business continues. Same arrangement, new management." "The arrangement is over," James's voice cut through the morning air. "This town isn't accepting new management applications." Blade turned, studying James with cold eyes. "The famous Sergeant Reeves. You caused quite a mess last night, but you don't understand how things work. There's always someone ready to step in." "Actually," James moved closer, noting positions and weapons with practiced ease. "You don't understand. The Devil's Wolves didn't just lose their leaders. We exposed their entire network. Every corrupt cop, every bought official. Right now, the FBI is freezing accounts, seizing assets, arresting collaborators." Blade's grin faltered slightly. "You think that matters? Streets don't care about FBI investigations." "True," James agreed, "but they care about profit. Look around. Every store has cameras now, connected to a secure network. Every transaction is recorded, every threat documented. The old system is gone." Through his earpiece, James heard the Sullivan twins confirming positions. Coach Peterson had his scope trained on Blade from his perch at the church tower. Deputy Chen had state police units on standby. "You're outnumbered," Blade stepped forward. "In case you hadn't noticed," James replied calmly. "I notice everything. Like how your right hand keeps twitching toward your jacket. The gun you're carrying isn't comfortable. You're not used to it. Your men keep looking over their shoulders because they know my people have them surrounded. And your car's engines are still running, meaning you're not as confident as you pretend." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Blade's face. He hadn't expected this level of tactical analysis from a small-town defender. "Last chance," James continued. "Leave now. Tell your friends this territory is protected. Not by gangs, Not by corrupt cops, but by the people who live here. People who aren't afraid anymore. Blade tried to maintain his tough facade, but James saw the calculations happening behind his eyes. The Devil's Wolves' fall had changed the equation. Territory wasn't worth much if it came with federal attention. "This isn't over," Blade spat, backing toward his bike. "Actually, it is." James pulled out his phone. "Because while we've been talking, facial recognition software has been running on my security feeds. Interesting warrants you have in Nevada. Would be a shame if that information reached local authorities." The Blood Riders retreated, trying to look tough, but fooling no one. As their bikes roared away, neighbors emerged from their shops and homes. Mr. Chen gripped James's arm. "They will tell others," the old man worried. "Other gangs will come." "Let them come," James smiled. "Each time they'll find us stronger, better organized, more united. That's how you win a war, not just by fighting battles, but by making the enemy realize the cost is too high." Throughout the day, James coordinated with Deputy Chen and his volunteer network. Security cameras were installed at strategic points. Communication protocols were established. The neighborhood watch was rebuilt, this time with military precision. Emma Chen brought coffee to the volunteers. "James, what you did, taking down the Devil's Wolves, scaring off the Blood Riders. It's amazing. But can we really keep this up?" James watched as children played freely in their yards for the first time in months. "We don't have a choice. Freedom isn't a one-time achievement, it requires constant vigilance." His phone buzzed. The FBI agent from last night. "Reeves, you need to see this. We're finding connections between the Devil's Wolves and bigger operations. Mexican cartels, gun runners, human trafficking. Your town was just the tip of the iceberg." James thought about the scared faces he'd seen yesterday, the relieved ones today. "Send me everything you have. If they want a war, we'll give them one." As evening approached, James sat on Sarah's porch, watching his neighbors reclaim their streets. The Devil's Wolves were gone, but he knew this was just the beginning. Other threats would come, but this time they wouldn't find scared victims. They'd find a community united, organized, and led by someone who understood that real peace comes through strength, vigilance, and the unwavering commitment to protect what matters. The war for Mason Valley was just beginning, and James Reeves intended to win it, not just for Sarah's memory, but for every person who'd ever felt powerless against those who ruled through fear. Let them come, he thought. They'll learn what the Devil's Wolves learned, that they didn't just threaten a town, they threatened a Marine's home. 3 days after the Devil's Wolves' fall, James sat in Sarah's study reviewing intelligence reports. The FBI's investigation had uncovered disturbing connections. The Ghosts operation wasn't just about neighborhood extortion. It was a hub for larger criminal enterprises. Deputy Chen arrived with fresh intel and troubling news. They're releasing some of the lower-ranking wolves on bail. Legal technicalities. The Ghosts' old connections are still working the system. James nodded, unsurprised. They'll try to reorganize, rebuild their power base. That's why we're not waiting. He spread a map across the desk, marking locations with red pins. Every safe house, every stash spot, every meeting place the wolves used. We're not just defending anymore, we're taking the fight to them. That's not exactly legal, Chen worried. Everything I do is legal, James corrected her. We're just going to make it impossible for them to operate. Watch and learn. His phone buzzed. Coach Peterson reporting from his observation post. 3 former wolves at the Blue Moon Bar looking mighty unhappy. Good, James checked his watch. Right on schedule. He'd spent his military career studying enemy patterns, predicting responses. The wolves' remnants were painfully predictable. First, they'd gather at their old haunts. Then they'd try to reassert control through violence. But James had already changed the battlefield. Sullivan twins, you copy? Operation Clean Sweep is a go. Across town, carefully orchestrated moves began. Health inspectors, honest ones this time, descended on wolves-connected businesses. Building inspectors found violations at their apartments. Traffic cops monitored their movements. This is harassment, one biker complained to Deputy Chen. No, she replied, writing another ticket. This is law enforcement. Get used to it. By nightfall, the message was clear. Mason Valley wouldn't be easy pickings anymore. But James knew the real challenges were still coming. His FBI contact called with urgent news. "Reeves, we've got movement. Cartel soldiers arriving from down south. They're not happy about losing their distribution network." "How many?" "At least 20. Heavily armed. These aren't street thugs, they're trained killers." James smiled grimly. "So am I." He activated his volunteer network, veterans from 4 wars, each watching different sectors of the town. Emma Chen's ham radio crackled with encoded updates. "Contact," Coach Peterson radioed. 3 SUVs, tinted windows moving south on Maple. "Sullivan twins, you have eyes on the back roads?" "Affirmative. They're trying to set up a perimeter." James had expected this. The cartel wouldn't just send soldiers, they'd send professionals. But they didn't know they were walking into a prepared battlefield. "Execute Operation Spotlight," he ordered. Suddenly, powerful floodlights blazed from rooftops and windows, illuminating every shadow where cartel soldiers might hide. Security cameras pivoted, covering every angle. Motion sensors activated. "What the hell?" one cartel soldier cursed as his tactical advantage vanished. James's voice carried through carefully placed speakers. "Gentlemen, welcome to Mason Valley. I see you brought weapons, which is a violation of local ordinances. I should mention you're currently surrounded by multiple law enforcement agencies." It wasn't a bluff. FBI tactical teams had been waiting. State police SWAT units emerged from concealed positions. Even honest local cops, tired of corruption, joined the operation. "You have exactly 1 minute to surrender," James continued. "After that, things get complicated." The cartel soldiers were good, but they weren't prepared for this level of coordination. They'd expected to intimidate a town. Instead, they found themselves in a military-style ambush. "This isn't over," their leader shouted as they retreated. "The cartel doesn't forget." "Neither do I," James muttered, watching through his surveillance feeds. Later that night, his volunteers gathered in Sarah's living room. The Sullivan twins brought pizza, Deputy Chen provided updates on arrests. Coach Peterson cleaned his rifle while providing tactical assessments. "They'll be back," Peterson warned. "Cartels hate losing territory." "Let them come," James replied. "Each time they'll find us stronger. This isn't just about defending anymore, it's about sending a message. Mason Valley isn't just another target, it's a community that fights back." Emma Chen brought coffee, her hands no longer shaking. "James, what you've done, it's a miracle. But can we really stand against a cartel?" James showed them the map, now marked with defensive positions, escape routes, safe houses. "We're not just standing against them. We're building something they can't defeat, a community that's not afraid." His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "The cartel says hello. Your sister's roses are pretty. Would be a shame if something happened to them." James's jaw tightened. They still didn't understand. Threats wouldn't work anymore. Mason Valley had changed. Its people had changed. "Chen," he called, "contact your FBI friends. Tell them it's time for Phase 2. The complete takedown? Everything. Every cartel connection, every corrupt official, every dirty cop still on their payroll. No more playing defense." As his volunteers dispersed to their posts, James stood on the porch watching his town. Lights glowed in windows that had been dark for months. Children's laughter echoed from yards that had been silent. The devil's wolves were gone. But the war for Mason Valley's soul was far from over. The cartel would send more soldiers. Other gangs would test their defenses. Corruption would try to creep back in. But they would learn what the wolves learned, that they hadn't just threatened a town. They'd awakened a warrior who knew that some battles were worth any cost. And James Reeves was just getting started. Sunrise painted Mason Valley in shades of amber as James reviewed the night's intelligence reports. The cartel's failed intimidation attempt had changed the game, escalating what began as a small-town dispute into something far more dangerous. His secure phone lit up with a message from his FBI contact. "Intercepted communications. Cartel leadership meeting in Mexico. Your town is now their top priority." James studied satellite images of the area, marking potential vulnerabilities. His military training screamed that this calm was temporary, the prelude to a storm. Emma Chen knocked on his door, her face pale. "James, someone left this on my porch." She handed him a manila envelope. Inside were photos, surveillance shots of neighborhood children walking to school, elderly residents at the market, families in their homes. The message was clear. The cartel had eyes everywhere. "They're trying to terrorize us again," Emma whispered, "like the devil's wolves did." "No," James replied, examining the photos with professional interest. "They're showing their hand. These shots all come from the same angles, same time patterns. They want us to know they're watching, but they just revealed their surveillance positions." His radio crackled. "Major," Coach Peterson's voice was urgent. "Movement at the old warehouse district, multiple vehicles, heavily armed men. They're establishing a forward operating base." Classic cartel tactic. First intimidation, then show of force, finally territorial occupation. Deputy Chen arrived with more troubling news. 3 former Wolves members found dead, message carved into their chests. "This is cartel territory now." James's jaw tightened. The cartel was escalating faster than expected, trying to fill the power vacuum before the community could strengthen its defenses. "Chen, contact your FBI liaison. We need those warrant requests expedited." "Peterson, maintain surveillance but do not engage." "Sullivan twins, start evacuating our high-risk residents to the safe houses." His volunteers moved with practiced efficiency. Weeks of training and coordination had transformed them from concerned citizens into an effective defense force. "What about the schools?" Emma asked. "Those photos they took, already handled." James showed her his tablet, displaying a new security system. "Every school now has retired veterans as security guards, high-resolution cameras, panic buttons. No child in Mason Valley will ever be vulnerable again." His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "You play soldier in your little town, but you don't understand what's coming. The cartel doesn't negotiate. We take what we want." James allowed himself a grim smile. "Actually, you don't understand what you're facing." Throughout the day, he monitored cartel movements through his surveillance network. They were professional, he had to admit. Their operations showed military precision. But they'd made one critical mistake. They thought they were fighting a neighborhood watch. They didn't realize they were facing a carefully coordinated resistance led by someone who'd spent decades studying asymmetrical warfare. "Major," the Sullivan twins radioed in. "Cartel soldiers questioning people at the market, looking for weak points, gathering intel." "Let them look," James replied. "Every person they threaten, every business they target, just strengthens our case." His FBI contact called again. "Reeves, it's worse than we thought. The cartel's not just sending soldiers, they're sending El Cirujano, their top enforcer, former Mexican Special Forces, suspected in over 30 assassinations." "Good," James said quietly. "Let him give us something to work with." As evening approached, James gathered his core team in Sarah's living room. The room had become their command center, walls covered with maps and surveillance photos. "They'll hit us hard," he explained. "But we've got something they don't expect. A community that won't break. Every threat makes us stronger. Every act of intimidation brings us closer together." Deputy Chen studied the tactical displays. "The department's compromised again. New cartel money buying old corruptions. Then we'll clean house again," James assured her. This was never going to be a quick victory. We're not just fighting criminals. We're fighting a system that allows them to thrive. His secure radio crackled. "Coach Peterson reporting. Major unmarked vans entering the warehouse district. Heavy weapons being unloaded. They're preparing for war." James checked his watch. Everything was proceeding according to his analysis. The cartel was predictable. They only knew one way to solve problems. "Let them come," he told his volunteers. "Every move they make, every threat they issue, every weapon they bring, it all goes into our evidence files. While they're preparing for a war, we're building a case that will destroy their entire operation." Emma touched his arm. "James, what if they target you directly? These people, they're not like the devil's wolves. No, he agreed. They're worse, which means we have to be better, smarter, more determined. Outside, the sun set over Mason Valley. Lights came on in homes that once stayed dark in fear. Children played in yards that had been empty for months. The town was healing, finding its strength. But James knew the real fight was just beginning. The cartel wouldn't stop with threats and intimidation. They were coming to erase Mason Valley's resistance, to make an example of anyone who dared stand against them. They didn't understand that some things were worth any cost, that real strength came not from violence or fear, but from protecting others. Let them come, James thought. They're about to learn what the devil's wolves learned, that they hadn't just threatened a town. They declared war on a community that refused to surrender. And surrender wasn't in James Reeves's vocabulary. The first sign of the cartel's real offensive came at midnight, not with violence, but with money. James watched through his surveillance network as luxury cars delivered men in expensive suits to City Hall for an emergency council meeting. They're buying the whole system, Deputy Chen reported, monitoring police channels. New bribes, bigger promises, half the council's already in their pocket. James had expected this. The cartel operated differently from street gangs. They corrupted from the top down. By morning, parking enforcement was ticketing cars outside resistant businesses. Health inspectors suddenly found violations at stores that supported the neighborhood watch. Building permits were mysteriously revoked. "They're trying to strangle us legally," Mr. Thompson said during the emergency community meeting. His grocery store had just lost its liquor license without explanation. "Not legally," James corrected. "They're using the law as a weapon, but they don't understand what they're up against." He unveiled his countermove: dozens of file boxes containing financial records, surveillance footage, documented bribe payments. 20 years of military intelligence work had taught him to gather evidence of everything. "Every council member who voted against us," he explained. "Their offshore accounts are now being investigated. Every inspector who suddenly found violations, their connections to cartel shell companies are documented. They think they're buying a system, but they're really building their own prison." His phone buzzed. A message from his FBI contact. "El Cirujano arrived last night. Already 3 bodies found. He's sending a message." James studied the crime scene photos. The victims were former Devil's Wolves members who'd refused to work with the cartel. Their deaths were meant to show the price of resistance. "They still think this is about fear," he told his volunteers. "Time to show them what real strength looks like." Throughout the day, Mason Valley's resistance intensified. When cartel soldiers tried intimidating shop owners, they found veterans waiting. When corrupt cops performed random searches, residents filmed everything. Every move the cartel made was documented, every threat recorded. "Major," the Sullivan twins radioed from their observation post. "El Cirujano's making moves. Spotted him meeting with former wolves at the abandoned factory." "Good," James replied. "Chen, notify your FBI contact. Time for Phase 3. Phase 3 was what James did best, turning the enemy's strength against them. The cartel had sent their top enforcer to break Mason Valley's spirit. Instead, they'd given James the perfect target. As night fell, El Cirujano made his move. James's surveillance cameras caught him approaching Emma Chen's house, likely choosing her as an easy target to terrorize the community. But Emma wasn't alone. James's network had anticipated this, prepared for it. "Now," James commanded through his radio. Floodlights blazed. El Cirujano found himself surrounded by FBI tactical teams, their weapons trained on his position. His reputation for violence meant nothing against overwhelming force. "Miguel El Cirujano Ramirez," James's voice carried across the quiet street. "You're under arrest for 37 counts of first-degree murder. The cartel can't help you now." El Cirujano tried to fight. He was good, James had to admit, but not good enough against operators who'd trained for exactly this scenario. As the FBI led him away, James received another text from an unknown number. "You think one arrest changes anything? We own this city now. Check your accounts." James replied, "Check all of yours." Within hours, The cartel's carefully constructed network began to crumble. Shell companies were exposed, bank accounts were frozen. Every official they'd bribed suddenly faced federal investigation. "This is impossible," a cartel lieutenant was heard saying on intercepted communications. How did they trace everything? The answer was simple. James hadn't just been fighting the cartel, he'd been documenting their entire operation, building a case that would destroy their infrastructure. Back at his command center, James briefed his volunteers. The cartel made the same mistake as the devil's wolves. They thought fear was their greatest weapon. They never understood that documentation, evidence, and community solidarity are more powerful than violence. Deputy Chen brought fresh intelligence. They're pulling back, regrouping. But James, there's chatter about bringing in heavy hitters from Mexico, real killers. Let them come, James said quietly. Every enforcer they send, every dollar they spend, every threat they make just strengthens our position. They don't understand we're not just defending a neighborhood anymore. We're dismantling their entire operation. Emma Chen served coffee to the volunteers. Her hands no longer shook when sirens passed. James, what you've done, it's more than just protecting us. You've given us back our dignity. James studied the tactical displays showing cartel movements. They were adapting, changing strategies, but so was Mason Valley. Each confrontation made the community stronger, more united. They'll try again, he warned his people. The cartel doesn't accept defeat easily, but neither do we. Outside, Mason Valley settled into another night, but it wasn't the fearful darkness of recent months. Porch lights glowed, neighbors chatted across fences, children slept safely in their beds. The cartel would send more soldiers, more money, more threats, but they would learn what the devil's wolves learned, what El Cirujano learned, that they hadn't just targeted a town. They'd awakened a community that refused to be victimized, and they'd challenged a warrior who knew that some battles weren't just worth fighting, they were worth winning at any cost. The cartel's response came at dawn, not with violence, but with lawyers. Dozens of them, filing lawsuits against James, his volunteers, the neighborhood watch, anyone who dared resist. They're trying to drown us in legal fees, Deputy Chen explained, dropping another stack of court papers on James's desk. Harassment claims, civil rights violations, defamation suits. James studied the documents with a grim smile. They still don't understand. Every lawsuit requires discovery. Every claim needs evidence. They're not attacking us. They're giving us legal access to their entire operation. His phone rang, the FBI contact sounding worried. Reeves, cartel leadership is furious. They've never failed to take territory before. They're calling in specialists, not just killers. Extortionists, blackmailers, experts in psychological warfare. Perfect, James replied. Let them waste resources. Every specialist they send is another thread we can pull to unravel their organization. Throughout the morning, James watched the cartel's new tactics unfold. Local media suddenly ran stories questioning the neighborhood watch's methods. Anonymous sources claimed James was a dangerous vigilante. Social media filled with orchestrated outrage. They're trying to turn public opinion against us, Emma Chen worried, showing him the latest news reports. No, James corrected her. They're showing their desperation. Each false story, each planted narrative gives us more evidence of their coordination. His secure radio crackled. Coach Peterson reporting from observation post. Major, got eyes on some interesting visitors. Cartels meeting with former city officials, judges, even some state legislators. Document everything, James ordered. They think they're building alliances. They're actually creating a conspiracy map for federal prosecutors. By midday, the pressure intensified. Building inspectors condemned 3 supportive businesses. The health department suspended restaurant licenses. Police conducted random traffic stops on neighborhood watch volunteers. But Mason Valley had changed. Instead of cowering, residents filmed every interaction. Instead of paying bribes, business owners documented every inspection. The cartel's bureaucratic warfare backfired, creating a paper trail of corruption. They're getting desperate, Deputy Chen noted, monitoring police channels. Chatter suggests they're planning something big. Multiple teams moving into position. James checked his tactical displays. The cartel had learned from their previous failures, deploying forces more carefully, but they still didn't understand what they were really fighting. Chen, activate Protocol Echo. Peterson, alert all observation posts. Sullivan twins, begin evacuation procedures. His volunteers moved with practiced efficiency, implementing plans they'd rehearsed dozens of times. Within hours, high-risk residents were relocated to safe houses. Surveillance coverage doubled. Every approach to Mason Valley was monitored. "You've turned the whole town into a fortress," Chen marveled. "Not a fortress," James corrected her. "A community. The cartel keeps thinking in terms of territory and control. They don't understand that we're not just defending streets. We're protecting homes, families, lives." His phone buzzed with another threat. "You've made powerful enemies. Everyone has a breaking point. We'll find yours." James's response was simple. "Others have tried." As evening approached, the cartel's new offensive began, not with violence but with precision strikes at the community's weakest points. Anonymous calls to child services targeted supporting families. Tax auditors appeared at resistant businesses. Building code violations mysteriously multiplied. But James had anticipated this. Each false report was documented. Each targeted audit created evidence of correlation. The cartel's attempts to use the system as a weapon became proof of their corruption. "Major," the Sullivan twins radioed in. "They're moving in specialists, former intelligence operatives, psychological warfare experts." "Good," James replied. "Let them come. Every specialist they deploy is another thread we can pull." In his command center, James studied the pattern of cartel movements. They were learning, adapting, but so was Mason Valley. Each new tactic strengthened the community's resolve. "They think they're fighting a town," he explained to his volunteers. "They don't understand they're facing a movement. Every person they threaten, every business they target, just adds to our evidence pile." Emma Chen brought coffee to the watchers. "James, these people, they're not just criminals. They have real power, real connections." "Yes," he agreed. "And that's their weakness. The bigger their network, the more vulnerabilities they create. Every corrupt official, every bought judge, every compromised cop is another point of failure." Outside, Mason Valley prepared for another night of vigilance. But the atmosphere had changed. Where once there was fear, now there was determination. Where there was isolation, now there was unity. The cartel would send more specialists, more lawyers, more threats. But they would learn what the devil's wolves learned, that they hadn't just challenged a town. They'd awakened a community that understood true strength came not from violence or fear, but from standing together against those who would rule through intimidation. And James Reeves was just getting started. "Let them come," he murmured, watching his tactical displays. "They're about to learn that some enemies can't be bought, some communities can't be broken, and some battles are worth any price." The war for Mason Valley's soul was entering a new phase, but this time, the defenders weren't just fighting back, they were winning. The cartel's next move came through an unexpected channel. James discovered it during his morning intelligence review, a series of mysterious real estate transactions sweeping through Mason Valley. "They're buying properties through shell companies," Deputy Chen explained, spreading property records across his desk. "Apartment buildings, storefronts, even private homes, all purchased at triple market value." James studied the pattern, recognizing a classic encirclement strategy. They're not just buying buildings, they're trying to control access points, surveillance positions, defensive strongholds. His secure phone lit up with an urgent message from his FBI contact. "It's worse than we thought. They've infiltrated the City Planning Commission. New zoning laws targeting your neighborhood coming tonight." The cartel had learned from their previous failures. Instead of brute force, they were using bureaucracy as a weapon. By controlling property and manipulating zoning, they could legally force out resistant residents. Throughout the morning, he watched their strategy unfold. Longtime residents received eviction notices. Business owners faced rent increases. Building permits for repairs were mysteriously denied. Mr. Chen shuffled into James's command center, clutching papers. "They offered 5 times what my store is worth. Said if I don't sell, They'll condemn the building. Did you sign anything? Number, my father built this store. Some things aren't for sale. James smiled. Good, because they just made their first major mistake. He activated his surveillance network. Every property transaction, every permit denial, every zoning change created a documented pattern. The cartel thought they were using the system. Instead, they were exposing their entire operation. Major, Coach Peterson radioed from his observation post. Got eyes on some interesting meetings. Cartel lawyers with city officials, real estate agents, bank managers. Record everything, James ordered. They think they're building an empire. They're actually documenting a criminal conspiracy. By afternoon, the pressure intensified. Code violations appeared on resistant properties. Tax assessments skyrocketed. Insurance companies canceled policies. But Mason Valley had changed. Instead of surrendering, residents fought back with paperwork. Every violation was appealed. Every assessment challenged, every cancellation questioned. His phone buzzed. Another threat. Everything has a price. Everyone can be bought. You're fighting the inevitable. James's response was simple. Some things aren't for sale. As evening approached, he gathered his core team. The tactical displays showed the cartel's property acquisition spreading like cancer through the town. They think they're being subtle, he explained, using legal means, legitimate businesses, but they don't understand what they're really fighting. They're creating a noose. Deputy Chen studied the pattern, tightening it slowly. Exactly, but they've made a critical error. They assume we're defending territory. We're not. We're protecting something they can't understand: community, history, home. Through his surveillance network, James watched cartel operatives meeting with city officials. Money changed hands, promises were made. The system they'd corrupted was working exactly as they planned. They're moving in professional management companies, private security firms, the Sullivan twins reported. Good, James replied. Let them invest more resources. Every dollar they spend, every company they create just adds to our evidence pile. Emma Chen served coffee to the watchers. James, these people, they can just buy whatever they want. How do we fight that kind of money? With something they can't buy. Loyalty, community, purpose. They think everything has a price because they've never encountered anything priceless. Outside, Mason Valley settled into another night of vigilance. But the atmosphere wasn't fearful. Where the cartel expected to find weakening resolve, they found strengthening determination. His phone lit up with yet another threat. Your neighborhood is already ours, you just don't know it yet. James smiled grimly. The cartel still didn't understand. They thought they were buying buildings, controlling territory. They didn't realize they were fighting something that couldn't be purchased: the human spirit. Let them come with their money, he murmured, watching his tactical displays. Let them try to buy what can't be sold. They're about to learn that some things are beyond price. The war for Mason Valley had entered a new phase. But this time, the defenders weren't just fighting. The war for Mason Valley had entered a new phase. But this time, the defenders weren't just fighting for their homes. They were fighting for their souls. And that was something no amount of money could conquer. Tomorrow would bring the final battle, and James Reeves was ready. The cartel was about to learn that while everything might have a price, some things, honor, community, justice, were worth more than all their blood money combined. Let them come with their lawyers, their bribes, their threats. Mason Valley would teach them that the strongest walls weren't built with concrete and steel, but with the unbreakable bonds of community. And those walls would never fall. The cartel's frustration manifested in an unexpected way. During his morning intelligence briefing, James noticed their communication patterns had changed, becoming erratic, desperate. Major, Coach Peterson radioed in. Overnight surveillance shows them moving in new players, different from the usual muscle. These guys look professional. James watched through his network as unmarked vans delivered teams of men carrying sophisticated electronic equipment. Not thugs or soldiers this time, technical specialists. They're escalating to cyber warfare, he informed his core team, trying to crack our surveillance network, compromise our communications. Deputy Chen brought more troubling news. They've hired a team of private investigators. They're digging into everyone's past, you, the volunteers, even supporters. James had anticipated this phase. When money and muscle failed, enemies always turned to information warfare. The cartel was hoping to find secrets, vulnerabilities, pressure points. Let them dig, he told his team. Every investigation they launch gives us more evidence of their coordination. Besides, he smiled grimly, they're not the only ones who know how to gather intelligence. Throughout the morning, James watched their new strategy unfold. Neighborhood Watch volunteers received emails containing personal information, subtle reminders that they were being watched. Business owners found their private financial records mysteriously leaked online. Emma Chen rushed in clutching her laptop. James, they're posting things about our families, things that aren't true. They're trying to divide us, he explained, create doubt, breed mistrust, classic psychological warfare tactics. But Mason Valley had evolved beyond such manipulation. Instead of hiding from the exposures, residents shared them openly. Every attempted blackmail became another documented cartel tactic. Major, the Sullivan twins reported. They've got hackers hitting the neighborhood security network, trying to blind our cameras. Good, James replied. That means they're getting desperate. And desperate enemies make mistakes. His FBI contact called with urgent news. Reeves, they're not just using tech specialists. They've hired a team of former intelligence operatives. These guys are good, real professionals. Perfect, James said. Because professionals leave professional trails, and I've spent 20 years learning how to follow them. By afternoon, the digital assault intensified. Security systems faced sophisticated attacks. Communication networks encountered jamming attempts. Surveillance cameras detected interference. But James had prepared for this. His military experience had taught him that technology was just a tool. The real strength lay in people. They think they're fighting a security system, he explained to his volunteers. They don't understand they're facing a community. Technology can be hacked. People's resolve cannot. His phone buzzed with another threat. Everyone has secrets. Everyone has weakness. We will find yours. James's response was characteristic. Secrets don't matter when you're not ashamed of who you are. As evening approached, he gathered his core team. The tactical displays showed the cartel's digital siege spreading across Mason Valley. They're trying to blind us, Deputy Chen noted, watching security cameras go dark. No, James corrected her. They're exposing themselves. Every attack creates evidence. Every probe leaves traces. They think they're gathering intelligence. They're actually building our case. Through his backup systems, James monitored cartel operators meeting with their new specialists. Money flowed. Plans were made. They thought they were launching a sophisticated cyber assault. Major, Coach Peterson radioed. They're setting up some kind of electronic warfare center in the old warehouse district. Expected, James replied. Let them establish their infrastructure. Every piece of equipment they install becomes evidence we can use. Emma brought coffee to the watchers, her face worried. James, these people, they can find out everything about us. How do we fight that kind of power? By understanding what they don't, he answered. They think information is power, but they don't understand that real strength comes from what we stand for, not what we hide. Outside, Mason Valley prepared for another night of digital warfare. But the atmosphere wasn't fearful. Where the cartel expected to find panic over exposed secrets, they found acceptance and unity. His phone lit up with yet another threat. Your defenses are already compromised, you just don't know it yet. James smiled grimly. The cartel still didn't understand. They thought they were fighting a security system, a surveillance network. They didn't realize they were up against something that couldn't be hacked. Human spirit. Tomorrow would bring the final confrontation, and James was ready. Let them come with their technology, their threats, their attempts at division. Mason Valley would teach them that while systems could be compromised, the bonds of community were unbreakable, and those bonds would never fail. The cartel's digital assault backfired spectacularly at midnight. James had been waiting for this moment, watching through backup systems as their hackers breached what they thought was the neighborhood's main security network. They're in, Deputy Chen reported, monitoring the fake systems James had set up as a trap. Downloading everything. Perfect, James smiled. Let them take it all. What the cartel's tech specialists didn't realize was that they weren't just downloading surveillance footage. They were installing a sophisticated tracking program designed by James's own cyber warfare contacts. Major, Coach Peterson radioed excitedly. Their command center is lighting up like a Christmas tree. Every computer, every phone, every device connected to their network is now giving us complete access to their entire operation. Throughout the night, data flowed into James's secure servers. Financial records, communication logs, operation plans. The cartel's overconfidence had given him exactly what he needed, documented proof of their entire criminal enterprise. Emma Chen arrived at dawn, bringing fresh coffee to the overnight watchers. James, the news is reporting a massive data breach. They're saying we lost everything. Let them think that, he replied, showing her his real displays. While they celebrate their supposed victory, we're mapping their whole organization. His FBI contact called, sounding impressed. Reeves, this is incredible. Their encryption just collapsed. We're seeing connections to corrupt officials across 5 states. They never understood what they were really fighting, James explained. They thought this was about territory, about power. They didn't realize it was about justice. By morning, the cartel's celebration turned to panic. Their successful hack had compromised their own security. Every attempt to shut down their systems just spread James's program further. Major, the Sullivan twins reported. Their tech teams are going crazy. They're trying to purge their systems, but it's too late. Sometimes, James finished, the best weapon isn't a gun or a badge. It's a line of code. His phone buzzed with a frantic message from an unknown number. What have you done? Do you know who you're dealing with? James's response was simple. Now everyone will know who you're dealing with. Throughout the day, he watched the cartel's digital empire crumble. Their encrypted communications became transparent. Their hidden accounts were exposed. Their entire network of corruption laid bare. They're running scared, Deputy Chen noted, monitoring police channels. Their lawyers are jumping ship. Their corrupt officials are resigning. Because they finally understand, James explained to his volunteers. They thought they were fighting a neighborhood watch. Instead, they gave us the keys to their kingdom. Emma Chen watched the news reports in amazement. All those powerful people, all those connections, are nothing compared to the power of truth, James finished. They built their empire on secrets. We just turned on the lights. His secure radio crackled. Coach Peterson reporting from observation post. Major, massive movement at their command center. They're destroying equipment, burning documents. Let them burn, James replied. We already have everything we need. As evening approached, he gathered his core team. The tactical displays showed the cartel's organization dissolving in real time. They thought technology was their advantage, he explained. They never understood that every weapon can be turned against its wielder. Through his network, James watched cartel leaders fleeing, their carefully constructed facade of legitimacy shattered. What happens now? Deputy Chen asked. Now, James smiled, we show them what real justice looks like. His phone lit up with one last threat. This isn't over. No one crosses the cartel and lives. But James knew it was over. The cartel had made the same mistake as the Devil's Wolves. They'd underestimated what a united community could achieve. Let them make threats, he told his volunteers. They're about to learn that some enemies can't be intimidated, some truths can't be hidden, and some victories can't be stopped. Outside, Mason Valley settled into another night, but this time there was no fear, no tension. The cartel's digital warfare had given the community its greatest weapon, the truth. And truth, James knew, was more powerful than any army. The war for Mason Valley's soul had reached its turning point. The defenders hadn't just protected their homes, they'd exposed an empire of corruption, and now justice would finally be served. As news of the cartel's implosion spread, a new energy swept through Mason Valley. Residents gathered in the streets, sharing stories of resilience, unity, and the power of truth. James watched from his porch, a sense of pride swelling in his chest. They had won more than just a battle. They had reclaimed their community's spirit. But he knew the work wasn't finished. Corruption had deep roots. And justice would require more than just exposing the truth. It would demand accountability, reform, and a commitment to rebuild what had been broken. His phone buzzed with a call from his FBI contact. "Reeves, the Attorney General wants to speak with you personally. What you've uncovered, it's bigger than we ever imagined." James smiled. "Tell her I'm ready to get to work." Mason Valley had taught the world a powerful lesson, that when good people stand together, no force of evil, no matter how wealthy or powerful, could prevail. The war was over. Justice had won, and James Reeves had kept his promise to protect his home. 3 months after the cartel's fall, Mason Valley transformed. The old community center, once the Devil's Wolves headquarters, became a symbol of renewal. James stood at the podium during its reopening ceremony, looking out at familiar faces, faces that no longer showed fear. "My sister Sarah always said a community is only as strong as the bonds between its people," he began. "For too long, those bonds were tested by fear and corruption. But today, we stand together, stronger than ever." The center buzzed with activity. Emma Chen ran youth programs in the renovated East Wing. The Sullivan twins taught self-defense classes in the gym. Coach Peterson coordinated a new neighborhood watch system, this time built on community trust rather than force. Deputy Chen, recently promoted to sheriff after the department's cleanup, brought James daily updates. Other towns were following Mason Valley's example, creating their own community defense networks. The ripple effects of their victory spread across the state. James's phone rarely stayed quiet. FBI task forces sought his advice on community-based crime prevention. Police departments requested training on building trust with residents, but his most important work remained in Mason Valley. Emma found him one evening in his new office, the converted church study where he'd once planned their defense. "They're calling us a model city now," she said, setting down his coffee. "A blueprint for how communities can stand up to organized crime." "They missed the point," James replied, reviewing security updates. "It was never about fighting. It was about building something worth protecting." The evidence they'd gathered led to over 200 arrests across 5 states. Corrupt officials faced justice. Criminal networks crumbled. But more importantly, Mason Valley's spirit had been reborn. Children played freely in parks that were once ghost towns. Businesses thrived without fear of extortion. Neighbors looked out for each other, not out of fear, but out of unity. Sarah's restaurant reopened under Emma's management, becoming a gathering place for the community. The rose garden James had replanted bloomed again, more beautiful than ever. "You know what today is?" Emma asked, pointing to the calendar. 1 year since James had first confronted the Devil's Wolves outside her father's store. "Time moves differently in peace," he said, watching the sunset paint Mason Valley in golden light. His phone buzzed, not with threats now, but with updates from other communities seeking guidance. The message was always the same. "How did you do it? How did you beat them?" James's answer never changed. "We didn't just fight the darkness. We built something stronger, a community that stands together. That's a force no enemy can defeat." The scars remained. Empty buildings waited for new businesses. Trust in law enforcement needed time to rebuild. But the foundation was set. Mason Valley had shown that courage wasn't about being fearless. It was about standing together when fear was strongest. "What's next?" Deputy Chen asked during their weekly security briefing. "There'll be others who try to test us." James smiled, thinking of Sarah. "We'll be ready, not because we're stronger or better armed, but because we understand what they don't, that true power comes from protecting each other." That evening, James walked Mason Valley streets, nodding to familiar faces. Children rode bikes without fear. Elderly couples sat on porches. Music and laughter drifted from open windows. At Sarah's grave, he placed fresh roses. "We did it, sis. We got our home back." The sun set on Mason Valley, painting the sky in shades of peace. James knew there would be other battles, other threats. But they'd face them the same way they'd faced the Devil's Wolves and the cartel. Together as a community, standing strong. For in the end, that was the lesson Mason Valley taught the world. that the strongest weapons against evil weren't guns or badges, or even evidence. They were the unbreakable bonds between people who refused to let darkness win, and those bonds would never be broken again. This is the end of the story. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.